the whole Geoshare idea really grew out of a workshop that was being held in London, I think it was January 2010, and a project initiated by Sir John Beddington, the UK Science Office, and it's called the Foresight Project. And some of you, I think, were involved in that effort. And it marshaled the world's modeling resources to look at exactly the questions we're talking about. We'll be talking about here: food, environmental security, looking over the long run. Here you see the cover for one of the publications, Future of Farming. And this Foresight Project, the most striking thing to me at that meeting was how much work the modelers had done. I mean, it's the case Ron was talking about, only they didn't have a choice. They had to deliver some results, so they spent 95% of their time on the data. And each group came up and said, well, we couldn't do irrigation maybe, but we got more crops. And another group did irrigation, but didn't have livestock. So many limitations and so much hard work going into that, and the people doing that weren't really the ones well suited to dealing with the data in many cases. It seemed like a great misallocation of resources. So actually it was over dinner that night, I talked with, happened to sit next to Sir John Beddington and talked with him about this, and he immediately said, well, yeah, in biology we have these infrastructure grants. We worry about this kind of thing. It kind of makes sense. And they commissioned, as part of the Foresight Project, a white paper that is available, and I think it links to that in that background document I sent. And Nelson and I and the co-authors spent quite a bit of time on that in order to scope out the possibility for something like Geoshare. So that's kind of this link back to the UK is that's why they regret not being here. Elizabeth and Alessandro, the program manager from DFID, eventually funding came through for a pilot project from the UK government. USDA jumped on board as well, and the three of them really, Ron, Elizabeth, and Alessandro, kind of oversaw the beginning of this project and got it going. Why was the UK government interested in this? Why are they involved? Well, it came out of the Foresight Project recommendations that not only, that starting with an interest in environment and economic objectives and a commitment to high quality research, obviously the need for improved data was quite clear to them. And the idea being a database fit for purpose or fit for perhaps different purposes, and dealing with issues related to agricultural productivity, water, land use, sustainable food production, food security, biodiversity, and so on. Results need to be easy to compare, and facilitating cooperation has been highlighted here. So I'm not sure that elephant may be me, because I often refer to myself as a bit of an elephant, get a hold of an idea and refuse to give up, can't forget it. And I'm not, actually I was looking at this morning, where did the elephant come from? But I certainly think of myself often as an elephant because of the one advantage we have in academia is we can stick with an idea for a long period of time, and sometimes that's what it takes. So I think Nelson and I have been elephants on this for a while. And there are some lessons that Elizabeth feels like they picked up from this. UK insisted on case studies, and we'll see those illustrated this morning, and the importance of managing standards and setting priorities. So that's greetings from the UK. They're sorry they couldn't be here. I wanted to now transition to the presentation I've prepared in terms of the mandate of this particular session, overview and lessons learned. So bring you up to date on what we think we've learned so far, and then we move forward on this workshop for you to tell us in a sense what you're learning and how you see this going forward. This is the culmination of a pilot project. A pilot project, by definition, it's a proof of concept. Is this idea crazy? And if it's not crazy, how could we move forward with that? So you see a number of they're subsequent to the 3 initial funding agencies, others became involved, and the ILSI Research Foundation played a major role over the last year in helping this workshop become a reality. So I mentioned the UK Foresight project and this white paper that came out of that. That's available on the web if you like. That was written 4 years ago. It's 4 years since we've been talking about Geoshare. Wow, a long time. I think the main conclusions out of that white paper were that, I mean, even 4 years ago, there was so much going on. Nelson did a very comprehensive survey of what was out there on the web, what in the literature, and there was already a lot, and now there's many times more out there. But the fundamental limitations of what was out there still remain, in our view, and that is that most of these geospatial data sets are regional or national in scope, not global. Why? Because it's easier to work at national scale or at the level of Europe, the EU, for example. That the global data sets, several of which were published by individuals in this room, were to a great extent one-off efforts that took a huge amount of time and effort, were published, have been extensively used, but now 2000 is a long time ago, and it's getting longer every day. Who's going to update this stuff? As Ron says, time came to update their database, and no one wanted to do it. This is the world we live in, unfortunately. So these don't get updated. We don't have the time series we need to do statistical analysis, to do model validation. There are high barriers to entry for those outside of the geospatial sciences. So Nelson spent 6 months trying to figure out how to work his way into this world of geosciences as an economist interested in climate issues and other things. It's just, there are huge barriers to entry, and often what you want is just a little bit of information. So in the end, you take whatever someone throws your way instead of the scientifically appropriate information. We'll see examples of that later this morning. So we have this proof of concept project that we're just concluding, and there are several key elements, as you'll see. One was building some interoperable databases, and this is where you'll hear later from Stefan and Naveen on work that's been done on Ghana and India. Several case studies we'll hear about this morning showing the usefulness of these data, and there was funding in the pilot to review the cyber infrastructure, which we did, and so not to actually build it, but to review specs and evaluate what would work, and design a proposal for an institution that might sustain this going forward. And you've received that prospectus via email. So these are the folks who were kind of funded out of this initial effort. We view Geoshare as a collection of nodes, so it's very much a decentralized thing. Find the best person in the world to do land cover and get them involved. Get the best person in the world to work on, for example, rice in Asia, and you'll hear about later on, and get them involved. So it's a mix of global nodes and regional nodes, and as you'll see later on, user communities have also become a potentially very important part of this. The pilot, we extended the pilot a year ago with funding from the ILSI Research Foundation to actually develop some cyber infrastructure. So the initial project was just find out what would, scope the landscape. Well, we stumbled across some wonderful colleagues, Carol Song and her team, in the Rosen Center for Advanced Computing, that we're working with Hub Zero. You'll hear much more about Hub Zero through the course of the day, and we said, gee, this is really cool, and it may actually be necessary for us to begin exploring this in order to understand the feasibility of Geoshare. So the ILSI Research Foundation funded the development of some of these workflows, and you'll see those illustrated this afternoon. You'll see again and again now, you hear about workflows. It's all about workflows now. That's our view, the latest view in the world. You're going to get sick of that, but we think that's what's needed to connect people doing the data work to people doing the policy applications, to connect the users back to the people doing the data and modeling. This is a workflow. an illustration of a workflow out of that document that was distributed. You could think about, in the case of SPAM, you'll hear about later on, 500 layers of geospatial data for a country or for many countries or for the world, feeding in to an algorithmic approach. We'll hear about SPAM, the spatial production allocation model later on, as one example of that. Fusing that data because ultimately you need consistent data in order to do the modeling, whether it's a crop model, Pegasus, for example, which is running on the hub, the DSAT model, GTAP, impact. All of these models need a coherent, consistent story in order to do reasonable analysis. And so we view this workflow as essential. The idea being someone could go back and replace just one of these layers. Say the irrigation layer for India that we're going to hear about later on. What if you replace that? How would that change the results you see on the implications of water scarcity in India coming out the other end? You may find that changes in the data won't make any difference, in which case you should invest your resources somewhere else if that's the only issue you're interested in. You may find it makes a big difference, in which case you need to really go back and make sure you do have the best possible data. So this workflow is a key way for setting priorities, a key way for generating interest in contributing to a new database. You have this one piece of the puzzle. Why should you contribute that to this whole thing? Well, if you can contribute that, rerun this whole workflow, generate new insights, write a comment on the latest paper in PNAS, that becomes interesting. If it's just put the data up there, maybe someone will get it, forget it. We found there's no interest in that, no incentive to do that. You can't pay people enough to get that done because no one cares. So what have we learned? The key slide from this. So incentives. We thought initially when we started this, if we got enough money and sent that out, we could get the job done. It's not. In the end, it's not about the money, it's about the incentives. You've got to motivate the individuals. The people involved in this are very busy. They're the top talent in their area, and it has to fit in with their incentive set with what they're doing already if you're going to sustain this. That's something we've certainly learned from GTAP. The centralized funding idea is also unworkable. We've tried that. It took us a year or more to get money from the UK through USDA to Purdue to Stefan and Bonn. And it's just, very frustrating. Cyber infrastructure seems quite important, but again, collaboration, incentives are key to get people to contribute there. We have to link to user communities. So you'll see later on, when we talk about institutional design now, in these nodes, there are now user communities in those nodes. For example, the AGNIP community, a critical user community and contributor to this. The core activities have to have stable long-term support, and I'll talk about later on the need for critical mass. So this is the agenda overview. And we'll talk after Paul gives you a bit more on the lessons learned. We're going to talk about why Geoshare, case studies this morning. We'll break for lunch. You'll see Hub Zero in action in the afternoon. We'll talk about institutional design, and both of those sessions will come with breakouts for you to give your opinions. We'll give you a bit, tell you what we've learned, but we need to know where you come out on this. Is this something we want to carry forward with? This workshop here is very important. You're going to determine whether or not Geoshare continues, essentially, and in what form. So you can have a massive impact here. We'll talk then tomorrow about data endorsement and data fusion as well.